Greetings everyone, I am Ken McCoy of the Jazz Vinyl Audiophile, and I thought it would be fun today to go over my top 10 Blue Note Music Matters, Analog Productions, or Tone Poet releases. And it's funny because after I pulled all these, and I just sort of pulled them according to the records I like the most that I have. I only have like this many of the high-res recordings. Oddly enough, most of them were Music Matters 45s. Which a lot of people sort of aren't into 45s. I don't want to get up every 5 minutes, but I feel like if you're sitting there listening to the music, what's the big deal? You know, if you're focusing on the music. So I don't have any trouble with 45s. And I know at the Jazz Record Center where I work on Saturdays, which is a world-renowned store, and we have good prices and a lot of records. People aren't into the 45, so they're easier to get. That's probably true if you're out hunting for records at your record store or online or something, even though I know that Music Matters pressings have gone insane prices online. So I wanted to run through my top 10 titles, and I'll tell you what they are right off the bat, just so you know, because some people complain that I don't list the titles when I do videos. And these are in no particular order, but number one, Dexter Gordon, number one, One Flight Up. I'm generally not the world's biggest Dexter Gordon fan, but I understand why people love him. You know, he's got a big, giant tone. He's got a very loping, graceful style. He was a good composer, wrote some really upbeat material. This record has Art Taylor, the great Nels Henning Orsted Pedersen on bass, Kenny Drew on piano. There's a certain rawness to Dexter Gordon's tone, that big tone, and it's a very low. It's a classic. There are hints to the older swing era in his sort of genteel, very gentlemanly version of hard bop. It has very thick bass. It has weak piano, so obviously it was cut of Rudy's. But it's just a really, if you're going to get a Dexter Gordon album, or if you're like me, you're not a huge fan of Dexter, maybe that's one to have. Dexter Gordon, One Flight Up. Freddy Hubbard, Open Sesame, 1960. Open Sesame, another one of my favorite Blue Note reissues, Soul Station. They're perfect recordings. They're perfect albums. Soul Station is Hank Mobley's first record. I believe Open Sesame is Freddie Hubbard's first session. And both those records have this kind of enveloping beauty to them. Beautiful playing, beautiful tunes, beautiful accompaniment. It's hard bop, but it's also sort of there's something otherworldly about those two records to me. It's very regal and very, there's a gracefulness to both of those records. Almost like everything is written out, even though obviously the solos aren't written out. But great accompaniment from Clifford Jarvis, Sam Jones on bass, McCoy Tyner, a young McCoy Tyner on piano. Classy tunes, the title tune and another tune by the late Tina Brooks, and it's just a beautiful record. I mean, to me, it's iconic. I should do a video on the most beautiful sounding Blue Note records, because this is certainly one of them. From 1960, I have the Music Matters 45 RPM version. Sounds good. I sort of strain to hear the differences between Music Matters, Tone Poet, Analog Productions. The Music Matters, I think maybe they're slightly more lush sounding. The Tone Poets have more air up top. This is just in my system, my ever-changing system. Analog Productions, maybe they have a little more drive, but these are all really minor quibbles. In presentation, they're all very the same. They're all, from the direct tapes. So that's my number 2. Freddie Hubbard, Open Sesame. Number 3, Freddie Hubbard, Hubcap. Now this is the other side of Freddie Hubbard, where Open Sesame is beautiful and relaxed and, you know, classic, almost lounge music to a degree. I mean that in just the fact that it's very relaxed. Hubcap is emotion, it's driving, it's in your face, it's aggressive. You know, there's some dark stuff happening under the surface in these tunes, and Freddie wrote, and he's a fine composer. Some of these arrangements are really tricky, complex arrangements. Some of the best drumming from Philly Joe Jones, the early Philly Joe Jones that I heard, 1961. There's fast tempos here, burning solos, it's in your face. And it's funny, you know, in retrospect, everybody sort of adores Lee Morgan, and he's great, but Freddie Hubbard probably had more technique than Lee Morgan. Freddie Hubbard was probably closer to Dizzy Gillespie in that way. I think Freddie Hubbard may have influenced, I think he definitely influenced contemporary trumpet players more than Lee Morgan did. But we have the Lee Morgan story and the book and the movie. Now they've just announced today, Blue Note releasing the I think 3 CD, 12 LP set of the complete Live at the Lighthouse sessions. The question with Lee Morgan is what if, obviously. But Hubcap, Julian Priester on trombone, Jimmy Heath on tenor sax, Cedar Walton on piano, the underrated Cedar Walton, who only died a couple of years ago, Lear Ridley on bass, who also just died recently, I think, and Philly Joe Jones on drums. And as I said, there's an undercurrent of darkness and turmoil on Hubcap. Even though it's very upbeat, I wouldn't call it happy. I call it upbeat, ready to beat you in the face. There are tunes that are pensive, sorrowful. There's some turmoil on there. It's a dark sound overall. This is an Analogue Productions 33 1/3 pressing that I'm very happy with. All these that I'm choosing here, I have either Liberties or New York pressings of. McCoy Tyner, the real McCoy from 1967. This record has always been in print in some way or another, whether you got a really cheap French reissue or the 80s reissues. It's one of the, before the current, you know, everybody into Blue Note, the real McCoy was always a really popular Blue Note record. In a way, it's sort of the quintessential Blue Note record. Great compositions, great improvisations, great accompaniment here by Elvin Jones, Ron Carter, and Joe Henderson on tenor sax. And it's just, you know, to a degree, this is one of those records where this is McCoy, it's 67, right after Coltrane, but you hear a lot of Coltrane in what Tyner's playing. The block chords, the very complex solos, almost architectural in the way that he plays. He was such, you know, if you listen to the early Impulse records of McCoy's, which were when he's young, I think a couple of them are pre-Coltrane. What is it? Nights of Ballads and Blues is one of them. Those are amazing records, but he's beautiful on those records. But after Train, obviously, he becomes much more charged and volcanic and driving, and there's so much of that on this record. Great improvisations, great interplay. It's a great record for Joe Henderson. Joe Henderson, you know, is one of the great. He's getting his due now more because everybody loves his classic records, and those records, Mode for Joe, Page One, In and Out, Inner Urge, have always been hard to find in any vinyl configuration. And when you did, they were often beat because they're such great records. Those are also some of the best Blue Note records, anything by Joe Henderson. But you can definitely hear the Coltrane influence on the real McCoy. I have a Music Matters 45, once again, sounds great to me. There are a lot of climaxes and punching on this record, and that's what Elvin is so great at doing. Just punching the utmost energy out of a climax, then letting it dissipate into the next solo. This is, again, one of the great Blue Notes. I think this is an essential Blue Note. You can say this is my essential top 10 list of Blue Notes, never mind if they're on some fancy pants thing or French reissue from the 70s. Yeah. Grachan, Moncur, Evolution from 1963 with Tony Williams and Bobby Hutcherson. Who else is on here? This along with Out to Lunch and Sam Rivers' Fuchsia Swing Song and the early Tony Williams records is Blue Note, staking its claim to the avant-garde. And they're, again, those records I just mentioned, to me, those are essential recordings from Blue Note. But this one is particularly fun. It's a young Tony Williams, and it's almost like the whole thing is sideways. Nothing is as you would expect. And you can listen, the great thing about all these records is you can listen to them repeatedly, because everyone plays, the level of musicianship, was just so high. So I think in the 50s, if you go back to the 40s, everybody had a radio in their apartment, in their house. People sang around the radio. A lot more people played piano. People were directly in touch with music in some form of being singers or instrumentalists. Everybody, that's what kept Gibson and Fender and Gretsch and Ludwig afloat for so long, because everybody played an instrument. It was very common. Now everybody wants to be a DJ, but I digress. There's so much air in this record, and there's some great tunes like Monk in Wonderland, and it just, you only have Bobby Hutcherson playing the chords, but even those are very sparse, and everything is very open, and it really is like you just kind of bouncing on these bizarre sort of clouds. There's no center, but there is a center. It's just very see-through the center. And Evolution, and I think there's another Grachan Moncur record, Some Other Stuff, is that what it's called? Some Other Thing, which is about as good as this. It's just a beautiful, ethereal, slightly cerebral record, the direct opposite of the whole Blue Note school of Sonny Clark or Horace Parlan or Stanley Turrentine or Lou Donaldson. This is, instead of being grits and gravy and in the cut, in your stomach music, Out to Lunch, Evolution, Fuchsia Swing Song to some degree, it's more cerebral music, it's more head music. Mobley, Soul Station from 1963. I have the tone poet version of this, the 33 1/3. This is one of my very favorite, if I'm locked away on an island, I want a copy of Soul Station. It's so beautifully played. It's, like I said with Open Sesame, it's just, there's something young and innocent about it to a degree. Beautiful solos, beautiful accompaniment. Wynton Kelly on piano, Art Blakey on drums, Paul Chambers on bass. There's a simplicity there that's almost perfect. It's so easy to get caught up in it. And to a degree, it's very much America in the early 60s, that sound of prosperity perhaps, that's a whole other thing. But there's so much beauty in this record. There are a couple standards, the rest are Mobley compositions. He was a really strong composer, which he doesn't get enough due for. He's acknowledged as the middle heavyweight champion of tenor sax, but he wrote very hip, sharp, sly compositions that really hold their own into this time. In some ways, I'd say he's definitely one of the greatest composers on Blue Note. I think he's a better composer than Lee Morgan was. He's very unique. To me, his melodies aren't as derivative as some of the other people on the label, or some of the people just in that era. He was such a great musician, and I read his bio. He died in 1986 at the age of 55. It's really tragic, but such a great record, and also an essential Blue Note. Number 7, Wayne Shorter's Speak No Evil. I could have chosen any of the Wayne Shorter records. My absolute favorite is Night Dreamer, but I think Speak No Evil might be more popular in general, along with Etc., Adam's Apple, and then later on, the All-Seeing Eye. I mean, I have to like be in a space to listen to the Wayne Shorter records because they're so intense. For me, they kind of create this emotional spell. They're really deep, and these records are evidence why he's, widely considered the greatest jazz composer of the last century. Not the last century, but definitely the last 50 years, perhaps. His music is so, on Speak No Evil, it's perfect. Great accompaniment from Freddie Hubbard, Ron Carter, Elvin Jones, Herbie Hancock. There's a spirituality in the Wayne Shorter records that I don't get. There's also a high level of intelligence. Wayne, if you read his biography, he was always an unusual child, thinking about Martians and the beyond and all that. I interviewed him for Stereophile a couple of years ago. At the very end of the interview, he said, what did he say? He said, and it kind of freaked me out because he'd just gotten out of the hospital. He only has one working lung, and they had to drain his lung. But he made a comment to me like, some people think people who commit suicide have lost their mind, but they're just thinking about a different place or something like that. He said so many unusual things to me in my interview. He says unusual things in anybody's interview because he's an original thinker. He's a genius. And you can hear that on all the Wayne Shorter records. And he's not just the greatest composer on Blue Note, an extremely important tenor saxophonist, never mind everything he did with a Weather Report, but there's just such a deep spirituality to me in his Blue Note output, even though no one would call them spiritual jazz. There's too much organization, there's too much serious arranging skills going on Speak No Evil, and all his records to be located, to be thought of as spiritual jazz, but it is highly spiritual. I think his music is spiritual music of the highest order. And Speak No Evil is a good place to start. I have the Music Matters 33, and it sounds beautiful. Number 9, Art Taylor, AT's Delight. He made 2 records for Blue Note, AT's Delight and Taylor's Wailers. This one is from 1960. I have the Acoustic 45, which is the precursor to Analogue Productions. This is such a complete record. He was a complete musician. He also wrote a great book where he interviews all these jazz musicians. I forgot the name of it. But, he was a great... He doesn't get heralded in the same way that Elvin or Philly Joe Joe does, but Art Taylor was so in the pocket. And this record is a testament to his musicality because it's all the tunes on here, some of them are like Denzel Best Move, are earlier, really early hard bop tunes. He also does Monk's Epistrophe, a couple tunes from Kenny Dorham, but just a broad array of tunes, beautifully played by Paul Chambers, Wynton Kelly, Dave Burns on trumpet, who did one record, I believe, for Vanguard, which is pretty highly sought after, and Patato Valdez on conga. And this is one of the few records where the conga, it was like Ray Barretto or something, where the bongo or conga playing doesn't get in the way of the drums. There's a lot of records that I think are forever marred, like some of the Stanley Turrentines or particularly some of the Lou Donaldsons, because of that endless do-do-dot, do-do, dot. And that chains a drummer to the floor. You can't really do anything when the conga player is just nailing everything down so simplistically. But this record and Herbie Hancock's Inventions and Dimensions, which I think is one of Herbie's greatest records, and also may have I don't know who the percussionist on there, but that's a record that works as an avant-garde percussion hard bop record. And that record is so open. But that's another story. But this Art Taylor record, as I said, is very complete. It's very whole. He wrote 2 tunes, Cuckoo and Fungi, and they do Coltrane's Cedia song, and it's just a very complete. And it's unlike all the other records I've mentioned. He's a drummer, so he's a kind of like a craftsman. He has to be open to all situations. All drummers do, and he didn't have as a heavy personality influenced style as Philly Joe Joe or Elvin, but he's on equally as many sessions, maybe more sessions than those 2 guys. But being a like all-around team player kind of guy, this is how this record comes across to me, because it's very complete. The tunes address all these different tempos, different moods. So it's a really classic if you can find it. AT's Delight. I think people might look over his records if they found them in the store, but it's definitely one worth having. From 1962, Hank Mobley's Workout. I have the acoustic Analogue Productions 45 RPM. This is one of the earlier Blue Notes that I got, because at the time when I was trying to learn how to play drums, I wanted to play along with Philly Joe Jones, because Philly Joe had a indefatigable, is that the word? Ride cymbal beat. It was just ding, 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 ding. He could drive that thing for like an hour straight, and it just drove so hard. And he's great on this record. And this is a great, and you know, the opening track, Smokin'. And this album is definitely a workout. This is one of those records where Grant Green is like the pitch hitter who comes in and saves the day. Doesn't save the day, but this is one of, I'm not a big fan of some Grant Green records, but he's a great soloist on other people's records, and this is one of them. He burns on this. He's got such a funky driving style. But this includes Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers, Philly Joe Jones, and Grant Green. This is an essential hard bop classic. And even though it has different moods on it, Smokin' kind of dictates the whole record for me. Just a mad blowing session. It's really, you know, a couple Johnny Griffin records are really great for that too. Introducing is another just off the charts kind of blowing session. Yeah, Workout. Buy it. Joe Henderson, In and Out. I could have chosen Inner Urge. Page One is his first record, but I'm not as crazy about that one. In and Out is just classic Joe Henderson tunes, great lineup, great accompanist, Kenny Dorham, who wrote a couple of tunes on here, McCoy Tyner, Richard Davis.